If you are not in a market that has a lot of competition right now, you're not doing enough. You need to get out there and find competitors to keep you honest. You have such an opportunity to learn from customers. It's so easy. They're right there. They want to talk to you. It's probably the most important thing you can do. Innovation requires the customer to be involved in that process. You are not innovative if no one is buying or using your innovation.
How does studying the history of innovation actually change your approaches as you work with your customers?
History doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes. If I could take you back in a time machine from 2024 to 1924, how long would it take you to acclimate and be able to be a functioning member of society? Probably less than a couple hours. Let's dial back 5 fewer years. You'd be lost. Completely and utterly lost.
Welcome to the Go Go Grow podcast, where we share practical advice and growth strategies for scaling B2B businesses. My name is Dasha Tishlik, and I'm the founder of Stratcraft.
Hi, my name is Michelle Page. I'm the founder of Sales Chasers, and I partner with clients for sales and revenue growth. So what do Al Capone, Babe Ruth, and Coco Chanel all have in common? Al Capone understood that working men just want to enjoy beer after a long day of work, and that working women wanted exactly the same thing. Babe Ruth understood people wanted a show, not just a game, even if they would never see him play. And Coco Chanel understood that women, they wanted freedom from tight corsets, from flowing gowns and complex updos, even and especially if that meant maybe showing some skin. Each one of these understood what the customers wanted, and they found a way to give it to them. The 1920s ushered in nothing short of a consumer revolution. Just as one transformation of the industrial revolution that preceded it, the information revolution that followed, consumer culture not only changed what we buy and how we buy it, but more importantly than that, it changed how we see ourselves and our role as a society. We are more than healthcare patients, college students, social advocates, and citizens. We are consumers, and we demand to be treated as such. Yes, I did have to read that. It is a passage from a review that was written about our guest's book. The book is called Booze, Babe, and the Little Black Dress: How Innovators of the Roaring 20s Created the Consumer Revolution. And our guest today is author and entrepreneur, Jason Voiovich. And I would love for Dasha to give Jason a proper introduction.
Yeah, before we jump in, Jason, what is your reaction to that wonderful review?
When you're an author, and some of the authors who are listening probably know this, that you get great reviews, you get reviews you don't really understand, and you get a couple of stinkers in there. So I appreciate, Michelle, that you picked a good one. And I am, it's funny. I love, researching and telling historical stories. There are reasons I do that for my own practice. But just having the opportunity to hear feedback from readers that it impacted them, that it taught them something, that they see things in a new way. That's really the whole idea behind innovation, is how do you see something in a way you didn't before? And that is probably the best feedback I could get, is that I help someone see something in a new light.
Well, we're so excited to have you on the show. Just for a slightly more formal introduction, Jason Voiovich is the fractional chief marketing officer. He has over 25 years of experience leading product, innovation, and marketing, and launched hundreds of new products. So that's very exciting for our listeners because they want to know how to do that right. And he's launched everything from medical devices to virtual healthcare systems, and also non-dairy consumer cheese, in case you're into that. Jason's the author actually of 2 books. So the one we're talking about today is his most recent book, but he's also written Marketer in Chief: How Each President Sold the American Idea. And today, Jason is going to be sharing with us his wisdom on how your customers can become the source of innovation for your company and the techniques and strategies to make customer-led innovation a competitive strength. All right, we want that as a strength. So you call yourself an innovation historian. I think it's something that comes through both in the reviews and then, of course, in the most recent book. And this is kind of my nerdy question is, how does studying the history of innovation actually change your approaches as you work with your customers?
You know, it's funny. I loved history before I started reading and kind of getting into it and doing it myself. And I look at it this way. No matter how many new product introductions I work on personally, and it's a lot, but no matter how many that is, it's still a tiny fraction of what I could know, or frankly, what I need to know in order to help my clients succeed. And I think of history as simply another way to learn. You know, reading history is great, but studying it is better. It's sort of that idea of deliberate practice, that innovation is a hands-on job. You don't do innovation. You can't just talk about it. You can't just read about it. You have to do it. And I obviously can't go back in time. So the next best thing I can do is study the primary sources myself and go and tell those sort of stories. And, you know, the most interesting thing is when I started studying the 1920s, is I realized of all the issues my customers were facing in their product innovation, how many of those sort of challenges have been faced over the past 100 years. Very similar. You know, history doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes. And it's a way to help me understand and see patterns faster than other people might see them. Because innovation is also a game of speed, and who can get to market with the best thing in the shortest amount of time. Whoever can do that wins. And if I have not just my experience, but literally hundreds or thousands of other experiences to call on, I can help my clients win. Simple as that.
I love that phrase that history doesn't repeat itself, it rhymes. And the first thing that came to my mind, and I think every single one of our audience members can relate to this, there are no new ideas in entertainment. Everything is a reboot. So something as simple as entertainment, there's very few sources of movies, songs, books. That's a new idea. There's no innovation. So that's the first thing I thought of.
No, that's a cool thought. And I was going to say in the same vein, you know, you might hear today people saying like, well, today is nothing like we've ever had before in the world, like technology changing faster, everything more AI, rapid. So what's your rebuttal?
My rebuttal is that I use the time machine metaphor all the time with people. And I'd say, if I could take you back in a time machine from 2024 to 1924, and we were able to step out of that time machine, how long would it take you to acclimate and be able to be a functioning member of society? Probably less than a couple hours. And here's what I mean by that. You would probably get in a car. Yeah, you'd have to learn how to drive a Model T, but it's not so different. You'd go home to a home in the suburbs. You'd probably have a mortgage. You would go to a grocery store. You'd have a refrigerator. You would have all of these. You'd turn on the radio like we would turn on a computer today. You'd pick up a newspaper. Yeah, the technology is different, but the mindset and the society is very, very much the same.
Mhm.
If I said, okay, get back in the time machine and let's dial back just five fewer years, or 10 fewer years, 1914, you'd be lost, completely and utterly lost. When we think about the amount of change in the average person's day-to-day life in the decade from 1920 to 1929, it completely eclipses anything else that people had seen in the post-war, you know, the suburban move, the information revolution, just being on the internet. Those things were major changes, of course, but they were nothing compared to the move from the rural to the urban environments in the 1920s, the 19 teens, 1920s, and nothing compared to the sheer amount of consumer innovation. Your life, your daily life was created in that decade.
And
And
that's true of the economy, the social norms, attitudes, the way of doing business, everything.
And I think that's the biggest thing, that when we talk about innovation, most people think about, and that's where the book starts. Part one of the book is all about product innovation and the new products and services that you have. But that's only part one. Part two and part three, are all about how we see ourselves, our identities, how we see entertainment, how we see information, how we see politics. All of those things changed in there. And one really interesting story that most people don't know is, who was the first media president? And this kind of goes back, and this was the original idea behind the book on the 1920s. It was learning about Calvin Coolidge in the 1920s as president, and really Bruce Barton, the founder of the ad agency in New York, BBDO, one of the founders, one of the B's. There's a B, a D, and an O, but he was the B. And he essentially created the modern political campaign. He basically packaged Calvin Coolidge as if he were breakfast cereal. He had features, there were target audiences, there were key messages. All of that didn't exist before the 1920s. The 1920s created everything we think about in terms of how we consume products, how we consume information, and how we even think about our own identities. And that thought that we can create any identity we want. People think that's sort of a new idea, kind of in the, that's a really 2020s sort of idea. It is not. It was Coco Chanel's idea that you could create your own identity, not someone, not someone creating that now. You'd be surprised at how, kind of not just social norms, but how gender fluid the 1920s were. Most people would be completely blown away by what they would read in the primary sources.
Wow.
It was very edgy back then. People have this idea about the past, that when they go to the 1920s, it's going to be this chaste, patriarchy, Christian, all of these sort of things. Like, boy, read some of Coco Chanel's diaries. Read about Louise Brooks. You would not have that impression.
The Algonquin Roundtable.
Well, speaking of things that have become norms that we don't really realize come from the 1920s, I think one of the things you so vehemently highlight in the book is that we are so used to having rollouts of features and things that, like, we expect people to respond to us. I mean, Michelle and I did a whole episode on Show Me You Know Me, which is like exactly what people expect now. But it was like GM and Sears were pioneering this idea of, like, you don't just give something to the customer that you think they need, you actually listen to them, and you have like your management team not sit in an office, but like stroll the floor and talk to customers to figure out if, you're really hitting the spot with the next year's features. So, can you talk a little bit about that? Just how is that now being adopted in companies, and what are the best practices around it that we can learn from both the past and the current?
I think when most people think about GM and Sears, they see them through today's lens. Like, oh, GM, it's stodgy. It can't seem to really get a whole lot right. And Sears is bankrupt. They're gone. They merged with Kmart of all things. Like, what can we possibly learn from them? And back in the 1920s, that they were the Google and Amazon and Apple of their time. Like, they were the companies everybody looked at for best practices. And I'll start with Alfred Sloan, the leader of GM during that time. What was really interesting about Alfred Sloan is when you read his autobiography, kind of his corporate autobiography, let's to be clear, it was My Years with General Motors. Everything in there is about operationalizing innovation. What are the processes and systems? He was an engineer, kind of a business person, engineer by training. So he thought in systems. And one of the biggest things, the entire system was tuned to think about and anticipate what would customers want next. That was the big thing. That was the big question. And I think one of the most insightful pieces that Alfred Sloan talked about was that there was a difference between what people said they wanted and what they actually would buy. That is a key difference, and we see that today, don't we? Every day we see that there are a lot of opinions, there's a lot of social media chatter, it's louder than ever. But Alfred Sloan said, one of the things he did is he wanted to give customers an early view. He would give kind of customers, salespeople, the marketing people, advertising, kind of an early view of the new models, whatever the new model was going to be. But he warned his team, like, there's a big difference between what people say they like and what they will buy when they're on the sales floor. And he said, don't confuse the two. It's just an early indicator. And what it's more likely is that it's going to give you an idea of what if you're going to make a mistake. Like if you're making a big mistake, that early feedback will catch big mistakes, but it will not necessarily catch something that people are going to want. And that's a critical lesson for especially B2B today, because you don't have the same sort of data that consumer products often do.
Well, let me ask you about
ahead.
B2B. The majority of clients that Dasha and I work with, and I'm guessing probably the majority of our audience, are in that B2B world. So can we continue that transition to how everything that you're talking about that started in those 1920s, GM and Sears are primarily B2C companies. So how does that translate to B2B?
I think being B2B, and I do plenty of work with B2B as well, I think B2B is tougher in one sense and a lot easier in another. And here's what I mean. It's tougher that if you're General Mills, let's say, and you want to do research on a new type of Cheerios, and it seems like they come out with a new type of Cheerios every couple of weeks. There are a lot. Oreo is the classic with that, by the way. You might have a data set that's 10 million customers. So you have plenty of data to work with, and you can really mine that for trends and micro trends and the whole deal. That's great, but it doesn't tend to tell you really well where people are going. What are people thinking of? What unmet needs do they have? The only way you do that is by getting in front of people and talking with people in real context. And this is where B2B really shines, or at least they could if they pay attention to it. It is so like General Mills might have 10 million customers for Cheerios. How many customers does the typical B2B client have?
A lot less.
20, 50, 100. That's a big number. Can you go out and see those people? You bet. That's what Robert Wood was talking about at Sears. That's why he wouldn't let his managers sit behind their desk, even though they did have a lot of data. He made them go out in front and serve customers. He made them observe that. And I think it's the biggest missed opportunity for B2B in innovation generally is get out behind your desk. You've got customers, they want to see you. And I can't believe how many customers I talk to that I ask, oh, when was the last time the president or CEO or, the general manager came out to see you? Like, I can't remember the last time she was out here. That's too long. You have such an opportunity to learn from customers. It's so easy. They're right there. They want to talk to you, yet you don't. It's probably the most important thing you can do. It's the most important thing that Robert Wood would tell his managers at Sears is your number one job is being in front of customers. Number one. Everything else is secondary.
Dasha, one of the things that you're very passionate about is that customer journey. And we've talked very frequently about, voice of the customer, voice of the prospect, customer engagement, focus groups, things like that. Can you tell us, in your view, why you're so passionate about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think you have to be, I agree with Jason completely. You have to be out in front of your customer, and you have to have it at multiple levels. Like, I think I think it is very important that the CEO of the company knows the customers, and in a B2B setting, that's very important, right? And when you start out as an entrepreneur, that's usually the de facto process, but it's not always. You have the scientist, product focused type of entrepreneurs as well, and they're so good at developing excellent products. If you have somebody who's a scientist at the core of your company, right, or that tremendously great software mind who can like code everything, well, it's really, sometimes they don't want to be out in front of the customer. Sometimes that sales piece of it can be kind of uncomfortable, and sometimes those people want to get behind kind of the desk as soon as possible, get back to the creation of their product piece of it. But in those cases, I would argue like that we have to, you have to figure out ways to get out of that shell again and go back to seeing the customer. And you can't outsource that entirely, though you can have somebody help guide you through that process. Like you can have somebody who's excellent at sales who sets up the meetings so that you're not doing the sales part, you're doing the listening and the relationship building. But I also want to address, like, you have to have other people in your company, like your chief operating officer, right? That person should be with the customer. They should know how the customers, let's say you're a manufacturing company, your COO should be visiting your customers' production lines and seeing what their production line is like, and seeing if yours should be in, you might be in different places, you might be doing different things, but not only can you learn from each other in very practical ways, but having that tight-knit connection, COO to COO, CFO to CFO even, that builds a bigger bridge with your customer at a variety of different ways and ensures that there's like a continuity of business and faster. But you can also improve your company and serve your customer better because you're learning about these other areas of integration. But that brings up another very important question, which is then balancing focus with innovation, because you can kind of get spread too thin listening to your customer. And Jason, one of the things you said addresses it a little bit, which is like the difference between what the customer thinks they want and what they really want. But how do you balance that? Like, what's the holistic approach?
I think when you think about that question, it's really an exploration versus exploitation sort of question, and every small business needs to get that balance right. I would argue that every business needs to get that right. And that's especially challenging for smaller ones because there is no dedicated R&D department. It's usually a mix. So the challenge for the leader is being able to balance not too much, exploration, but not too much exploitation either. And that's like, think about it. It's very common for a young company to really focus 80%, 90% on exploration, right? I mean, that's kind of every startup, but think about the tricky part with a company like a WeWork, where 80%, 90% of that time was on exploration, building new things, new this, new that, new crazy stuff, and not quite enough time on exploitation, which would be in their case, how do we make sure that we have a sustainable rental business model here? Because if we don't, we're in all kinds of, leases that we can't get out of. That's an exploitation question. How do we exploit the market opportunity we created? The issue is, for most startups that I've worked with, especially funded startups, once they get to product market fit, kind of the exploration phase, most VCs kind of want to get rid of that CEO. And the reason they want to get rid of that person isn't because they don't like them or they're not good at it. It's that they are good at it. And that most exploration focused startup founders are very bad at making the pivot to exploitation. Like, how do you take advantage of that opportunity? There's an old saying in VC that the CEO who gets you to $1 million is not the CEO who gets you to 10 and is not the CEO who gets you sold, gets you to exit. And it's what they're really talking about is mindset, that people tend to be good at certain things. So I think the biggest central challenge to innovation for B2B leaders is balancing exploration and exploitation. So it kind of comes down to, well, how do you do that? And I think that it really does come down to discipline. It's not something that people think about a lot with innovation, but you absolutely must have both of those perspectives recognized in the organization. Sometimes uh, that means tasking and like, okay, I've got a team of 4 executives. 2 of those executives are going to be focused on exploration. 2 executives are going to be focused on exploitation. Uh, that can be a way to do it, that people are tasked specifically. But however you do it, however you balance it, however you time box it, however, whatever situation works well for you and the culture of your organization and the time it's at, sometimes those you need to be doing more exploitation versus more exploration. I think just simply asking the question, if you've got an L10 meeting, if you're running traction or whatever, you've got an advisor who is continuing to poke at you. Okay, you've been spending a lot of time creating a new product. How are you selling it? How are you optimizing it? How are you just ripping cost out of that supply chain? You've got to make sure that you're not doing any one. I think the mistake is when we think about too much innovation, too much operation, there is no right answer. And that's the tough part. We want a simple answer. We want if we only focus on innovation, that's going to do the trick and everything else will take care of itself later. You run out of money and you go out of business. The other way is you just go out of business slower.
So let's look at the flip side of that. A lot of entrepreneurs say, I am innovative. I'm coming up with new ideas and new ways to meet the market. And in reality, they're just really fitting or solving a common need or a simple need. So they kind of have a misperception of what they're doing and what they're fulfilling. Maybe they don't have that team of advisors that you refer to. So how do you suggest each entrepreneur or each rising business owner, how can they self-evaluate and say, am I really being innovative or am I just solving what I think is the problem?
I think that is an outstanding question.
Thank you.
I think it's a quality question. The only way I have a wonderful colleague and client who focuses on asking better questions. That's their entire focus as an organization, which is just spectacular. As they help other clients ask better questions because it's the only way you get better answers. There are 3 answers to that I want to give your listeners. Number 1, I think entrepreneurs misunderstand what innovation is, and they're confusing innovation with creativity. And here's what I mean. And it's kind of the better mousetrap question, right? You built a better mousetrap. Are people using the better mousetrap? Those 2 things aren't necessarily the same. You can build a great new creative mousetrap. And we have all seen great products that kind of look good on paper. They work really well. They're really fun and no one buys them. Okay. That's the creation of the product is a creative process. The adopting of the product by the market is innovation. Innovation requires customer behavior change, whether that is using it in place of something else, using it in conjunction with something else they're already using. But innovation requires the customer to be involved in that process. You are not innovative if no one is buying or using your innovation. You're creative. There's nothing wrong with being creative, but it is a necessary but insufficient condition to innovation. Okay, that's the number 1 thing. So your first litmus test with are you being innovative is, are people changing their behavior based on what you did? If they're not, you have not innovated yet. That's a key distinction, and that kind of flips it from the kind of the technical engineering side to the customer side. That's a key perspective shift that you need to have. That's number 1. Number 2, most organizations have the wrong idea about competition. Okay? They read Blue Ocean Strategy And they believe that we want to be in a blue ocean with no competitors, and that is the ideal place to be. For most small B2B businesses, that is wrong, just clearly wrong. And here's why. When you're a consumer business, you are out in the marketplace and your competition's all over you all the time. You are, if you're not kind of doing better and figuring out new ways to do things, you're dead in the water. B2B, though, the feedback loop is slower. So if you're in a market that really doesn't have any competition, or the competition is really slow, you will not face that pressure that you need to face. You must have competition. You must seek them out. Find,
Mm.
if you are not in a market that has a lot of competition right now, you're not doing enough. You need to get out there and find competitors to keep you honest. My favorite story about this, I know it's a B2C example, but it's fun. Everyone's heard it. Some of your listeners are old enough to remember the 1970s. Dasha, take a knee on this one. Michelle and I got your back. Okay. We remember Burger
Hey,
King.
wait a minute. How do you know that?
Yeah.
I'm
Dasha told
teasing.
me.
Oh.
Sorry.
You must have seen my resume.
I did math. Do you remember back in kind of the late 1970s when Burger King was essentially eating McDonald's lunch? They were coming out with the chicken sandwich. McDonald's was kind of slowing down. They were still on top of the game, but they just weren't hungry enough. And Ray Kroc was actually having a lot of trouble just getting the organization to innovate, until one of his leaders defected, went to Burger King, and started to really kind of take things off there. And
well, that also, I'm sorry, you're probably going where I was going to go.
Yeah, well, think about what happened in the late 1970s, early 1980s. What things came out? The Happy Meal came out in the early 1980s. The Chicken McNugget came out in the early 1980s. Two things that completely transformed fast food, the entire supply chain and marketing for fast food, came because Ray Kroc faced the kind of competition he needed to move his organization forward.
Who else came onto the scene? Dave Thomas.
Yeah, Wendy's came out. Pizza Hut, KFC came, and they started to hit it about that time.
Yeah.
Pizza at Taco Bell, kind of the taco, the kind of fast Mexican.
Zantigos.
Such a huge time.
I love the vibe here, and it's making me hungry because we are filming this around lunchtime. But I really want to make a point, Jason, on what you're saying, and I want to make a point on it not only for B2B scale up customers, but Michelle and I also work with startups. Sometimes I work with very early stage startups, and there is usually, especially when you're pitching, there's this desire to be like, we're the only product that solves this problem, and obviously the investors want to see that you have something new and innovative, but I've had several clients who have really amazing solutions, highly technologically advanced, really creating something no one has that solution for. They truly are innovating, but I also still challenge them to say, like, we really need to dig into each of these customers, because we might say, well, nobody out there addresses A, B, C, and D, but these people address A, B, C, these people address C and D, and they kind of address A. And we also want to understand, like, they're winning the market. Just because we'll address all these problems does not necessarily mean we will win against them, because they also have a brand, they have a distribution channel, they have these other things. And so even if you are truly creating something that's going to be challenging, innovating, and moving the ball forward, you have to love and appreciate your competition. You gotta do your real, not just like, people are like, oh, look, we looked at their competitors. I'm like, let's go dig into their patents. Let's go see how they went through the regulatory process. Let's go figure out what their branding is, because we can learn so much right here. These people are already out there selling. We need to know everything they know, because to succeed, even with a superior product, or superior service, you're going to have to deliver that in a way that's competitive against all these exploitation aspects of the business as well. As fun as it is to experience, I'm a kind of exploratory person in general, so I'm like, ooh, new software, new technology, yay! But if you're busy, you've got like kids, projects, you're running companies, you're like, yeah, I'm glad you're innovating, but if I have to upheave my entire tech stack, I have to retrain all the doctors in my office, that's like extra work on me. So you better be not just innovative, but delivering in a quality way across all these other elements as well. So there's the innovation pressure, and then there's also, even if you're innovating, you want to be thinking about your competitors right now and understanding them.
I think the important thing to think about there, Dasha, is that the important way I think people can think about it, and B2B leaders can think about that, is innovation's a relationship. You're doing something and your partner is doing something. And that for a good relationship to work, they have to communicate well, and they have to kind of be in sync and working together. And that innovation is kind of, there's a technical side of the innovation, that's what you do. And then there's a behavior change side, that's what your partner does. So, and if you don't understand each other and you're not you're not in sync, you're not thinking about what are you asking people to do. That's what classically, that's what Clayton Christensen would say, is customers hire products to do jobs for them. So
Yeah.
how easy is it for your customer to hire your product as if they were hiring a person? What would they do? Are you asking them, is it a contested change or a not contested change? Is it something that they're going to be able to replace what they're doing or to use in conjunction with what they're doing? And what is the cost to change? All change has cost. And if you think about innovation as behavior change and behavior change as a change process, now you can start to lean on all of the literature and all of the advice we have about how people change. And how do you get people to change? And if you think about it in that way, I think most entrepreneurs and most B2B folks, when they think about innovation, think primarily about kind of the technical side of it and how they're solving kind of the technical problem. And they are not thinking very much at all about how are people going to need to change to adopt that. And usually it's 80-20 if you're thinking about the customer at all, maybe 90-10. I'm not saying the most successful ones flip that, and they're thinking about their customer 80 to 90% of the time, and basically mapping that change journey and how they're, like a customer journey, like a little mini customer journey, a change journey, and making sure their product is tuned at each stage of that change journey. They tend to be the most successful. I would be happy with 50-50. I'd be thrilled with 50-50. I promised you 3 things. I'm gonna do one more thing. That's we're not going to do the Governor Perry in Texas thing. Your political people will know what I'm talking about there. That's an Easter egg for them. The third thing is many B2B companies are resource strapped. And they are, there's a lot of pressure to be like, I want to create something in the market that has never been created before. And that's a wonderful sentiment. Most of the time, though, if you look at the most successful innovators, and I've studied hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of them, most of the ones you remember today are not the very first people to do it. They're the second. They looked at the idea, they found the idea that worked, and then found a way to get people to adopt it. They were not the very first people to come up with the idea. It is actually very rare that the first company to come up with the idea is the one that actually is successful bringing it to market. So,
are you referring to Edison and Tesla?
Well, those two, Xerox and Apple. There are so many examples. Just dozens and dozens and dozens of examples. So in my book, I talk about the speedboat example during the Great Depression, or not during the Prohibition, rather. And when basically the speedboat folks looked at, they were rum runners, and they were trying to outrun the Coast Guard. What they did is they let the Coast Guard write the specification for the speedboat, And because they're a public agency, they needed to publish the specification. Well, the rum runners basically went back to the boat manufacturers and said, got the spec. I know you're going to build that for them. We're going to build a slightly faster and better one for us. They took all the hard work, all the specification, tweaked it, so they were always ahead of the Coast Guard all the time. They just looked at their specification. They found whatever the first mover advantage was. Yes, there is a first mover advantage. Absolutely. I'm not going to deny that. But if you're a cash-strapped B2B organization trying to find a way to innovate, a really good technique is look at what other people are doing out there, find a way to make it a little bit better. Short circuit the innovation process.
So let me tie in what we've talked about for the last 5 minutes or so with a past episode and kind of foreshadowing some future episodes. So a lot of what we're talking about throughout this season 1 of Go Go Grow is launching. So you're launching a business, you're launching a product, you're launching an innovation. What you're talking about with this innovation, and we just talked about the blue ocean strategy, and especially in B2B, it's a very difficult place to be. We recently had an episode which comes first, sales and marketing. For these smaller companies, you kind of have to straddle that line and put a little bit of resources in both. So with a typical startup, your sales and marketing budget should be somewhere, depending on industry and whatnot, somewhere between 7 and 14% of your expected gross revenue. If you are in that blue market strategy, my guess would be you probably need to be somewhere around 10x your expected gross revenue. Would you think that's somewhere in the ballpark? Because you have to educate. You have to educate not just about your product, about who you are and who needs you and why they need you.
Yeah, there's an old rule in marketing is education is not marketing.
Right.
And you will go broke.
Mm-hmm.
And it's why first movers, when you look at first movers, especially smaller organizations that are truly first movers,
Mm-hmm.
they are truly coming up with the new technology. It's novel, patentable, the whole deal. Why is it that they tend not to be successful? Because they need to educate the market.
Mm-hmm.
Educating the market is kind of that first step in people understanding kind of what it is you're talking about. That is thankless, and people tend not to reward their educator with a purpose or with a purchase. It's just it's an awful sort of truism that I see again and again and again. They spend all kinds of money, and I have clients like this. They had spent all kinds of money educating the market, only to have someone come in later with a slightly better product and take advantage of all of that education that they did, and basically focus on the sales and marketing side, true sales and marketing, not kind of the basic education, your kind of foundational research. It's kind of the difference in a scientific context from doing kind of theoretical research, foundational research, like how do genes work, to kind of practical research and commercial research, the commercialization process of how do I take this thing I know about genetics now and create a therapy. Those are two very different things. And that's why we tend to let universities and fund them to do basic research, because most other for-profit organizations would go broke doing it. There's a lot of research to be done in both cases. It's not to say, well, it's just kind of tweaking a couple of things and you go into market with a new pharmaceutical. That's not true. But if they also had to sequence the human genome before they could do that, Pfizer would have gone broke. There's just no way to do that.
So Jason, kind of going to, education, if you're having to focus on that, that's not good. Think ahead of time about the behavior changes that your customer is going to need to be making. What other sort of tips, let's say like quick tips or long tips on adoption from a sales marketing perspective, should companies be thinking about?
I would say that when people think about marketing, there's not a really good definition that everyone can agree on. So I'm going to give you one. In marketing, you can ask marketing to do 7 things and 7 things only. Build awareness, build emotional bond, tell people about your product, build loyalty, encourage them to try it, get word of mouth, or convert people to buy. Those are 7 things. You might have to rewind that and go back and kind of list all 7 things: awareness, emotional bond, product news, loyalty, trial, buzz, and activation.
Can you say that backwards now?
Yes.
We will list those and put them in our resources for this podcast.
I think it's a good idea.
Yeah.
When people think about marketing, and you can look at it, I would encourage you to train yourself a little bit. Go out and look at marketing that you may see. The average person sees something like 5,000 pieces of marketing in an average day. So you got plenty of options. Okay, so take a look out there the next time you go to the store and find out, what are people trying to do? Are they trying to tell you about the features of a product? Like, my product does all these things. That tends to be product news. Most B2B organizations are really good at product news because they've got all kinds of features and they want to tell you about it. I would tell you that there are 2 things you can focus on when you think about marketing as a, as a startup, as a B2B with limited resources. Focus on emotional bond and trial. Those are the 2 big things. Leave everything else. Well, we need people to be aware. Not really. You need to get a small base of customers starting to use your product. They need to be able to try it. How can you get it in their hands so they can use it, so that you can learn? If you've got a product on the shelf that no one's buying, you ain't learning nothing. And not only are you not generating revenue, you are not learning. That's the big thing. And what I really want to do is, I want that product to become indispensable. I want those first customers to love it, not just like it, love it. Because if they love it and they are connected to it at an emotional level, it will help them move through the behavior change process quite a bit faster. And they not only will teach you how to improve the product, but they will tell other people about it. You'll build that core that you need of customers who then, when you do awareness building marketing and you do advertising and you do all that other stuff, what triggers will work. Some of that is that kind of crossing the chasm. You got to kind of watch for that you're making sure that you're looking at people who are risk takers versus people who are a little bit less risk averse. But you got to start somewhere, and you got to start with, getting it into people's hands and making sure they love it. That part's key.
I wanted to ask you a quick question. So most of what we've talked about has been product-based.
Sure.
So innovation can also be in services. And
Yes.
Dasha is the founder of Stratcraft, and I am the founder of Sales Chasers. So we are service-based businesses. We help clients in Dasha's strategy, commercialization, go-to-market. I'm more revenue-based sales and marketing. But we have some innovative service offerings of how we help clients, and we're trying to develop more. So how does everything that we've talked about relate to putting out new innovative services, either developing them, launching them, the sales and marketing side of it? Because a lot of our clients are going to be the same way. Or I'm sorry, a lot of our audience members are going to be the same way.
I think it's one of those other misunderstandings of innovation. And I hope that with this conversation, your listeners are starting to get a sense for, like, oh, innovation isn't a product. Innovation is a behavior change.
Mhm.
That can be done with a product. It can be done with a service. It can be done with a combination of those 2 things. How you change the behavior doesn't matter. Whether that's with a service innovation or product innovation, there's nothing we've talked about thus far that doesn't apply to either a service or a product. Nothing at all. Because once you shift your perspective to, like, oh, got it, I need to change how my customer does things. Like, they're doing things a certain way now. I needed them to change. Actually, services tend to be much more flexible in that regard to do true innovation, because services by their very nature, have a little bit of that ability to mold onto a process a bit easier. A product is a product, it's a set thing. That's why it makes them easier to talk about, easier to communicate. They are tangible in many cases. A service is squishier. A service is a promise. But a service also has, that's its disadvantage. Its advantage is that it can much more easily graft onto that customer journey and that change journey. So I actually think service companies have an easier time innovating, frankly, than product companies do. And for exactly, they're great on the creative side. It's easier for a product focused company to do the creative side. It's easier for a service company to do the behavior change side. And one's more important than the other.
So I just want to take a quick note and say that in preparing for this episode, we had at least 2 times as many questions as we've gone through already. And this is already the longest episode we've ever taped. So unfortunately, we're going to have to wrap up. But Jason, you have so many incredible ideas to share. You have dived into this topic both with your clients and your many years of experience, but also in this deliberate research into how presidents have marketed themselves, how innovators have created these new consumer behaviors. So really just such a wealth of knowledge. And so you're so thoughtful. Your thoughts are so well organized. I'm sure audiences are really appreciating it. So everything we've talked about, the tips, the book, articles from Jason, they're going to be linked in the show notes. So please take a look, whether you're on YouTube or on Apple Podcasts, it's in the show notes. And of course, as you guys know, listening to us, we're also, we've rolled out our website, gogrowshow.com, and we're going to start populating that with resources here shortly as we're going through the process of rolling out season 1 and figuring out, getting all our taping done. Then we're going to be translating that into blog posts and resources on the website as well. So thank you, everybody, for listening. Michelle?
I want to welcome all of you to our office hours, which have recently launched. You will find out more of that if you are on LinkedIn. We do have live event invitations on that. If you are not on LinkedIn, I will certainly encourage you to be on it. It will be a game changer for your business. But you will find information about office hours on YouTube. And I believe we can also put it on the RSS outlet and the other podcast outlets as well.
Excellent. And if you found anything in this episode that really struck a chord with you, please share it with somebody else who you would find it useful and beneficial to their business. And of course, our podcast, Go, Go, Grow, is available on all major platforms. Please subscribe to get current updates. Thank you so much.